Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack. And as we get into this podcast episode, the first episode of 2026, in our last podcast, we talked about endings. We talked about grief, unfinished stories, and what it means to move forward without closure. And I want to say in this episode, as we get started, that a new year doesn't require a reset. I understand there's a lot of pressure in January to declare who we're going to be or what we're going to fix and how this year is going to be different. But the truth is, real change doesn't happen because we decide it should. It happens because we've already been doing some work. Something has already shifted, often quietly in small things before we can even really name it. So this episode isn't about resolutions. It's not about productivity or becoming a better version of yourself. This episode is really about orientation. And orientation is the direction you've already been moving towards. You're already facing in this direction. It's about the lessons you've learned, the wisdom you've gained, how you respond when things get hard, and what you've reached for when you're under stress, not what you promise yourself when everything feels clear. So if the last episode was about honoring what we're carrying forward and what we're putting down, this episode is about noticing where that movement is already taking us. Because clarity usually doesn't show up with instructions. It shows up as a quiet knowing that something is different, even if we can't articulate what comes next. And so that's why I wanted to start the year of these podcast episodes with a conversation rather than just a monologue. And it's also why I'm really glad that Rachel is here with me again on the podcast. Rachel and I are going to be talking about what it means to begin a new year without demanding certainty, without trying to control what unfolds, and how we listen for direction instead of declaring it, and how we stay oriented toward what feels true rather than just what looks good on December 31st or January 1st. So, welcome, Rachel. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I had said to you last night when we were confirming what we were going to be talking about today and what we wanted to explore in this podcast episode that you've had some changes this year. I've had some changes this year. So I thought it'd be good for us to have a conversation about the changes that we faced. I talked a little bit in the episode last week about some of the changes I've experienced this year. So I don't need to get into all of that again. But as you talk about the changes you've been experiencing this year, we can have a conversation about that. So that's what I had said to you last night. The first question I wanted to start with was, as this new year starts, what has been shifting for you? Maybe what changes have already happened and things that are in process that maybe you weren't aware when we started 2025.
Yeah, some of this I don't think your listeners know, but I recently made a move to Oregon, which so I don't know, 2 states away now, 3 states away from Utah. And I've started my own private practice here, which has been fascinating and interesting and a little bit overwhelming. We had no intentions of moving at the beginning of 2025. And I think we spent all of our vacation time coming to Oregon to see our friends who had moved here a couple of years ago. And I think we just fell in love with it. We fell in love with Oregon. We missed our people and decided I think that this is our midlife crisis. If we're going to like have a midlife crisis, we didn't buy sports cars, we moved states. And there were a lot of reasons why it was a good time for us, right? But that has been probably our biggest shift. Our child went from karate to taekwondo, which is I'm having to learn a whole nother language because I was learning Japanese and now I'm learning Korean because taekwondo is Korean and I don't know any of the weapons or any of the moves or any of like so there's just I'm having to reorient to that because we've been doing karate for 3 years, four, yeah, 4 years. And now we're in Taekwondo. But she's doing really well. She won her first competition out of the
Oh,
gate.
nice.
Yeah, she did great. And
And for listeners who don't know this, your little one is a little one. Like
she's
she's
tiny.
tiny.
Yeah,
And I mean,
she's
she's
grade.
tough.
She's in second grade, and the kindergartners are bigger than her. She's just little.
Hmm.
And so, like, she was sparring in this competition, and the girl she went up against had like a 4 inch reach on her. Same age class, same experience level. And they're both in second grade, and this girl had 4 inches on her. And so, like, just to watch her be so little and so determined, it's impressive. And she did great. She was really, really great at it. But yeah, so she's little. She's learning how to use that to her advantage, which I think is cute. She's starting to actually understand that concept.
Mm.
And then, yeah, you told me this that like the owning of the business is a lot harder than people think it is. And it is. Like there's a lot to the business side of things that has just been mind-boggling to me. I didn't know I had to do that.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, but it's been really good. I'm located in a college town in Corvallis, really close to OSU, which is a completely different client demographic. And I can also tell like some skills that I haven't used in a while, I'm having to grow.
Mm.
And that's been really good. I haven't worked with young people. I haven't worked with young college age students in a while, like consistently. And I have a few on my caseload now. So that's been new. I'm learning a lot of new terminology that I didn't know existed. That's great. Yeah. So I think that's kind of a summary of things that have been shifting for me recently.
Yeah. And as change often happens, moving is a pretty big, significant change.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, the beginning of 2025, you weren't, you guys weren't thinking of moving. And
Mhm.
there were certain things that happened as the year progressed and as the year went on, because you guys moved like the beginning of October. And
Yeah.
so as that time was coming up and you guys were making that decision, those previous things that were happening clarified, oh, this is our next step, or this is the
Yeah.
direction we're headed, and this feels right.
Yeah. And I think, at least for me, right? Like, I think that I was feeling that and I was like reading the signs, but I don't think I could allow myself to go there until we went there. Like, I think that that
Hmm.
was some of it too. But like, even when I told you and when I told my mom, both of you had a similar response of like, yeah, we kind of saw this coming.
Hmm. Yeah.
We kind of knew that this might be a thing. And
Hmm.
I was like, oh, well, I didn't until here.
Right.
Um, and I mean, like, I do think a lot just kind of lined up slowly over the course of really like a year and a half.
Even
And
I would say, I didn't know you were going to move. No, I knew it was a possibility. And it was more in the back of my mind. It's not something I was really spending a lot of time thinking about, but I would say I also was observing or witnessing closing up the chapter in Utah.
yeah,
I can say that now. At the time, I don't know that I could name it.
yeah,
But then when you told me that you guys were going to be moving, it was like, oh, yeah, that's what I was seeing. I was seeing a closing of your time here.
yeah, yeah. And I think it definitely happened the way that it needed to, but like it happened faster than we expected, right?
Mm.
A lot faster than we expected. And so there was a lot of scrambling at the beginning. It was like,
Uh-huh.
okay, we made this decision, and then the entire universe lined and was like, yeah,
This is not a good market to sell a house in. And
no,
the
well,
initially
thanks.
your real estate agent told you that.
Yeah.
but that's not what
She said
happened.
90 days. She said your house may stay on the market for 90 days and then you're going to have closing. So we were thinking, 3, 4 months. No, it sold in
Hmm.
12 days and closed in like 25. Like it was so fast.
Hmm. Like just over a month.
Yeah. Um, which looking back on it, like that was crazy. And I'm still living out of boxes. Like we're still trying to unpack. But in some ways, I think it needed to happen that way. I think probably for my own anxiety. And that was the other thing. We didn't have a place to live. We had to find a place to live because we weren't expecting to like have to scramble like that. But it all worked out.
Yeah, as it usually does when things are right.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been chaos the last 3 months, but it's been good chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. So, how would you, like, looking back from 2025 to where you guys are now? I think sometimes when we're talking about orientation, sometimes at the beginning of a year, we have some good intentions, and we sometimes what we think our intention needs to be or should be isn't necessarily aligned with the orientation of where we're facing or where we have arrived in that moment. And so, how would you say that you experience orientation differently than goals, or what clues do you find yourself paying attention to when something is shifting internally?
Yeah, I think for me, right, like goals always feel external and sometimes they're attached to orientation or not, right? But coming to the age old New Year's resolution of losing weight or getting fit or whatever, right? I'm already,
Getting organized, things like that.
those are typically things that we feel like we need to fix about ourselves and that we don't like about ourselves or that we feel shame about. And we set those goals or those resolutions based on that kind of shame. And I think for me, like that idea of orientating or going inwards or living more authentically is really an inward thing and is less about strength, right? Like I could have probably set the goal of moving by 2026 years ago, right? And the reality is before we even settled in Utah, we had the plan was that we were going to move for me to go to grad school and that didn't work. And so I went to grad school in Utah. And then the goal was we're going to move after I finish grad school. And we just couldn't get out, right? We
Hmm.
had goals to move, but I don't think it was our time to move. I think that we needed that time there. I think that we needed to be there for the time that we were there. And I think that growth happened that needed to happen. And I don't know that it would have happened any other way, right? And then
But I think
I,
if you get too frustrated with the goal, you miss what needs to happen while you're
yeah,
here.
right. And so we just let go of that goal, right?
Mm.
And I think on some level, and you and I have talked about this, I grieved that. Like I didn't want to stay in Utah. And I grieved that and I grieved our original goal was to move back east, which again, I'm glad that we didn't do. There's so many pieces of that that I'm glad didn't happen. I had to grieve the loss of that goal. And I think that was orientating to myself, right? Like even when my friend moved to Oregon, right? Like one of the things that I had said to her is I can live pretty much anywhere if I have my people. I had to learn that really early on because, right, I didn't move to Utah because I liked Utah. I moved to Utah because I loved the person that I was choosing to live with. And that's where we got jobs. But I had to let go of that. I had to let go of that goal. I had to recognize that that was me trying to force something that was not going to happen, that was creating strain in our relationship, that just wasn't available to us at the time. And in this move, it wasn't planned. It wasn't a goal. It was literally us asking questions. What about this? How does this feel to you? Why are we staying here? What would this look like if we did move? Do we have the financial capacity to do that? What is this, right? So it was a lot of like internal like does this align with who we are as people? And it did, right? And I think that that's the difference. And we wouldn't have had it not aligned with all three of us.
Mm.
Because I mean, even our kid was like, yes, we're moving. Or like she's wanted to move to Oregon and she has done really well here, actually. But I think that there is so much in that was an internal process versus I'm making a goal and I'm reaching a goal. And I think that in some ways is how I produce art. I don't always start with like, I am painting this or I am doing this. Sometimes it's literally getting out the canvas and picking out some colors and kind of deciding what could this become, which I do feel is it's a different process, right? And I do paint stuff from picture references and things like that. And that is a different kind of creative process. And so when we're talking about the idea of orientations and beginnings, we're really talking about starting a journey where we don't know where it's going to end, right? We're just taking the
Right.
next step in the process. And we don't know where it's going to go or what that's going to look like. We're just trusting our feet.
How would you say, for those who are listening, how would you say you're forcing the direction versus listening for it?
I think that probably looks different for different people. I know for me, like nothing works out, right? Like everything is
Hmm.
stressful, everything is hard, like nothing lines up. Thinking about when we're trying to move to North Carolina right after grad school. Well, technically, I think it was like the last little bit of grad school because I was at Pathways to Healing. We hadn't switched to Healing Paths yet, and my spouse had gotten an offer for a potential opportunity there. And he did the interview and it would have been a completely different career shift for him. It would have thrown us into, I think I've talked about on this podcast before, like we've gone through a deconstruction, but it would have thrown us into the middle of leadership in
Mm,
the denomination that we were in kind of a big way. And everything felt hard. Like just setting up the interviews felt hard. And this was pre-COVID, but like getting a Zoom interview and things like it was just hard. It was just really difficult. And it was in an area that we really wanted to live in, but we knew no one there. There was just so much that we were like, okay, we'll see, we'll see. And then they started waffling, right?
mm.
And it just became one of those things where it was just like, maybe this is not for us. And I think the ultimate thing that like hit for us was the role that they expected me to play.
Okay.
And I don't fit that role. I've never fit that role. I made that very clear when I entered this relationship. Like I'm not that person. And the expectation that that would shift for them
Mm.
was kind of astounding, right? Like it was that, oh, you're asking me to shift something that's very core to who I am to make you comfortable. Probably not going to happen. But I think, right, like it just wasn't a good fit. It wasn't, and we could have ultimately, like, we could have taken the job. We could have
You could have tried
done
to
it.
make it work.
Yeah, we could have tried to make it work, and we didn't because it didn't feel right. It didn't, there were things that were really, really hard and things that we were going to have to compromise that we didn't necessarily want to compromise in order to do that. I think usually every time in my life that something has been right or true to my self growth, I make a decision and then it happens. Right. I would say that that happened with my kid. I did not want children. I was pretty adamant about I don't want kids. I wasn't really sold on marriage either, but my spouse is adorable. And so I keep him around because I love him. But really, like those things just felt like things that I was not equipped for or things that I didn't feel like aligned with my values. And for kids, I was really scared. I was really scared to have a kid. I was really scared that I was going to be a bad parent. that I wasn't going to have the capacity to love her the way that I needed to. And then we made that decision. And it was, I mean, it was months of us talking, like, what are the pros and the cons? What is this emotional hangup? I went to therapy to kind of get over some of my mom wounds. And then we made that decision. And then it just felt like everything clicked into place on what was going to work and how it was going to work and how work was going to work while I was breastfeeding and things like that. All of those pieces, just they were hard and they were difficult, and like the birth wasn't easy. We had like some big things that happened, but it also felt internally it was congruent with my soul, I guess,
Mm.
is the way that I wouldn't say that it was necessarily easy or simple, but I would say that it felt like I never lost integrity in that process. Like I never got frustrated with the integrated part of myself in that process. So that's
I
what
mean,
I would kind of say.
you've heard me say this a lot over the years. Often I will say, if no isn't an option, we can't really say yes. And so
Mhm.
I think even that process is different being a parent when you have explored no, no, I'm not going to be a parent. And then you say yes. And regardless of how hard it is, I think it's a difference when you said yes, not because it was expected or just following what is expected of you and the roles that you play, but because you said yes. It's an informed yes.
Yeah,
And so, yeah, you go through difficult things and you're going to face the mom wounds that then become mom fears because you said yes.
right. Yeah. And I think that there is a level of that that's true and kind of all of those like orientating to self, right? I think that there's a space, like even thinking about going back to the resolutions thing, I think that a lot of resolutions come from a societal shame piece of like who we should be
Hmm.
versus who we actually are. I think that wanting to live a healthier life is an admirable thing to orient to. But I think what that looks like externally is is different for people, right? I have a friend who dealt with an eating disorder for most of her teenage years and early 20s. And she's right now bigger than she's ever been, which is not that big. I want to be clear. She is really healthy. She looks really great. But also that space of like it took her into her 40s to feel comfortable enough with herself to eat in public, right? And that kind of healthy looks different than, I don't know, going to the gym every day, right?
Or starting a
There's a
diet.
or starting a diet or like whatever that is. I think that finding that space of what is actually healthy for me as a person and following that path, you don't know where it's going to end up. You
Yeah.
just know that it's going to end up probably a more holistic version of yourself
Well,
where
I was going to say, and there's a lot of smaller steps that go into shifting that. That's
mhm,
not
yeah,
a like identifiable, we can name this on January 1st and then accomplish it that year.
right, yeah, no, again, she started getting treatment for her eating disorder I think when we were like 23, 24. We're in our 40s. She's a little older than me, but like we're in our 40s and she is right now starting to say, I feel like I have control of my body. I feel like I'm not fighting with my body. I feel like I can go and eat and enjoy myself without being conscious of that. That's, I mean, that's 20 years, give or take, 15, 16, something like that, right? Of time that she has spent in therapy, working on herself, working on why she got that belief about her body in the first place and where that came from and what relationship she had been in that contributed to that. There's so many layers of her journey that are small baby steps, right? I think for all of us, whether we're making a conscious decision to find ourselves, quote unquote, or our life is just chaos and we need the chaos to tamper down a little bit. I think all of that requires some of those micro steps of like, who am I? Who am I today? Who am I in this moment? How do I want to answer now? Where did these default settings come from? Do I agree with this? And those questions are a lot harder than, I want to lose 20 pounds this year.
Right. And I think that that requires us to also explore what we stop demanding of a new year or of this
Mhm.
time period. What are you not asking of yourself this week? Or what roles or expectations feel outdated of ourselves? Those aren't things that most people are considering, not just at a new year, but often in their life. They're not considering what does it mean to let this process or let a year unfold rather than performing it.
Right. And I will say, like, there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with that.
Which we don't like
And
as human beings.
we don't. And I also think, at least for me in my life, like, I feel like the world has been teaching me since COVID, I have no control. I just, who knows? And I think that probably before COVID, for me specifically, I had a belief that I could control enough to feel safe. And I think since COVID and since deconstruction and raising my kid, who is a completely different personality from me, and recognizing like I don't get to control her or her choices or her goals, I think that there's a level of recognizing I just get to control how I respond. That is what I get to control. And there are a lot of things that I wish were different, that I wish I had control over, that I could like beat my head against the wall for. And it just doesn't seem worth it. At the end of the day, me not having control over the things that I can't control is actually a lot more peaceful in the journey. I get to just be me and do what I need to do and focus on the things that are important to me. And yeah, sometimes it doesn't turn out the way I want. Like there's a lot of mistakes and there's a lot of messes and there are a lot of like, what are we doing here? But I also think that that's the cool part of humanity, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that getting to learn, getting to be messy, getting to like figure out next steps and allowing that to happen and recognizing you're not going to know the consequences for that is just brilliant. And it is messy, it is scary.
And I've also learned over the years that sometimes the life I would plan out for myself, if I had that level of control, maybe there wouldn't be nothing wrong with it, but often what unfolds is usually better than I would have imagined or even known to plan for. And
Mhm.
even like you were saying with raising your daughter, she's different than how you were or what your personality is. And adapting yourself to be her mom,
Mhm.
brings about a really great outcome. She's a delightful human and it develops a part of you that maybe you wouldn't have developed otherwise. And so I think that's applicable to a lot of areas of life where we have to take stock and be like, okay, this is making me uncomfortable, or this is pushing me out of my comfort zone, or I don't know what I would plan for this or how to even navigate this. But I'm just going to take the next step and then take the next step and figure it out. That gets us pretty far, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And I think that there's a level of like the just figuring it out where I do look back at how I had my life planned because I had a plan. I did. I was a planner. I had a plan. And if my life had worked out the way that I thought it would at 17 when I left for college, I wouldn't have the experiences that I have right now. I didn't plan on getting married and I didn't plan on having kids and I didn't plan on being a therapist.
Same
Um,
to all of that. Yeah.
right? I was in art school. I was not planning on, I wasn't planning on any of this life. I wasn't planning on any of this growth. I wasn't planning on any of the friends that I've made along the way. That path, what it was a completely different path, right? It was a completely different state and school. And I would have had different friends. I would have been in different circles. I would have been doing different things. And not that that would have been I'm kind of thinking about the multiverse here in Marvel, but not that those things would have been any less different or wrong. They could have been just as delightful and good, right?
Mhm.
And it wouldn't have led to the me that I have right now.
Right.
And at this point in my life, that me that I have right now is the most important.
Mm.
She will change tomorrow because she will grow a little bit more tomorrow. And next year
Mhm.
we may be doing something completely different. I don't know. But I love that possibility, right? And trying to control something to fit a narrative or to fit a space or to fit an ideal really reduces our ability to be amazing. It just does. It takes
Yeah.
away all of the ridiculous, improbable encounters and moments of humility and moments of those aha moments of I did not know that this was a thing for me and it is a thing for me.
Mhm.
Or I did not know that this wasn't a thing for me and I am standing here and I'm realizing I have been taught my whole life I should want this and I don't. And that's
Mhm.
good. That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed sometimes with working with clients, and as you know, as a therapist, sometimes in the work we do with clients, it's also a process for us,
Mhm.
or we learn certain things in the work we're doing with clients that is very applicable for us. And one of the things I've noticed with quite a few clients, and sometimes they will literally tell me, this is my worst fear. If this happened, this would be my worst fear. And that worst fear is determining and driving their life in some way, which is what usually lands them in my office. Sometimes it's a little more indirect. Sometimes they're saying, I had one client who would say to me, I respond to things like it's the end of the world, even small and really insignificant things. And it's a problem. I know it's a problem. I overreact, but it feels like even this small thing is the end of the world. And as I continued to work with that client and others, some directly, they say this, I'm like, this already happened. Or with this one particular client, I said, oh, your world ended when you were 9. This isn't a worst fear. This is your trauma. This is a big wound that happened. And so now that this is actually in the past, not the future, what now? What comes after this happened?
Right.
And it's a different way of looking at that. Putting down that fear starts to open up a lot of possibilities, which can also be scary.
Mhm.
But it's let's look at, if we put this down, then who are you? Then what happens? Then what are you focused on?
Yeah. Well, and I love that. And I think that there's a level of like I was just putting some pieces in together, right? Like that personal apocalypse. Like what happens when your world doesn't and you've survived it, right? We've made a lot of movies and video games about surviving the end of the world.
Right.
And I think that that's a great question. Like what happens for you? How do you
Hmm.
survive? How do you
When
grow? How do you,
literally the world didn't end, but yours did.
yeah, yeah. I think that's a beautiful way of looking at that. And even recognizing the fear there because it has happened. You have lost.
This isn't a fear of something that could happen. This is what did happen. And sometimes when they're kids, I think the brain can process that in a way that they can live with it, that this becomes a future fear instead of something they're literally surviving at ages they shouldn't have to.
Did you ever watch Pan's Labyrinth?
No, I've
Guillermo
never
del
heard of
Toro
that.
movie.
I've never heard of that.
Okay. Well, it's a foreign film. When it came out, it was huge. It's made by the same guy who did the water movie that was recent.
Avatar?
It's no, it's
Oh,
Guillermo del Toro. He did one of the Hellboy movies. Anyway, Pan's Labyrinth is in Spanish. It's a Spanish movie,
okay.
and it takes place during the Spanish Civil War. And I think I'm pretty sure it's Spanish Civil War. Anyway, it's this little girl who there's a question on, like, for me at least, she's accessing this like magical world, and she's having to defeat certain monsters, and all of that is very much tied to what is happening in the real world at real
Mm-hmm.
time. And I watched that whole movie, and to me, and I don't know if this was Guillermo's del Toro's point of it, but to me, this movie was about kids processing trauma that they couldn't process, because her life is extremely traumatic outside of this magical world. There's a lot going on in the world with the war and the things that are happening there. And then she's escaping into a fantasy that she can kind of control, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a dark movie. It's dark, but it is probably one of my favorite foreign films of all time. And I think that idea of kids making sense of things the way that they can in order to survive without it like actually making sense, like without it actually getting processed. Like, kids don't have the way to process it that they
Mm-hmm.
need to. But I do think that it creates that narrative of like, well, if I just do this, or if I just like, for people with OCD, I think sometimes out of those traumatic events, we get that if I just lock the door 5 times, or if I just make sure that these things are in a row, then this outcome won't happen. There was some of that in my own life of, if I can just take care of everything that would make dad mad, then he won't explode. There's not really a lot of control that we have over those things as children. And as those big events happen and our world ends, we are kind of left with the like, okay, well, what do I do? And I do think that kids pick that up and put that somewhere to process later. But then I think that we have default mechanisms and things like that. We then have to question as adults
Yeah.
when we have the
Well, and
capacity to do that.
at some point in adulthood, continuing to not process it or leave it unresolved also robs us of the life that we need to live as an adult when we do have more power in our life. Maybe
Right,
not as much control as we would like, but we can have some more power as adults.
right.
I was just thinking, as we've talked about what we put down in the new year or what we leave behind, obviously there's some resistance, there's ambivalence, and there's doubt, all things that as humans we don't feel comfortable with. Maybe we're comfortable with resistance, but not ambivalence and doubt. So I'm just wondering, do you notice any resistance showing up, or in the past, even maybe not currently, but how do you tell when it's protective, that resistance, versus limiting or keeping you small?
I think that my resistance that's limiting is really coming from a shame space, right? What will people think? How will I be treated if I fail? How is this going to be viewed? What is my tribe going to think? What is my tribe going to do? What would God think? What would God do? I think that all of those were narratives in that resistance that came from a place of staying small and staying safe, and have been. And there has been some of that even now, right? Like in the move, I think that my parents have been incredibly supportive in our move, despite the fact that we moved another 1,000 miles away from them.
Supportive from a very long way away.
Yeah, they have been really supportive. They're FaceTiming my kid all the time. They're doing everything that they can to show, hey, we support this, which I was kind of worried about, honestly. I thought that my mom would take it a lot harder than she has. And I think that maybe I think that maybe she has, honestly. But I think that it's in that space of she's not manipulating that or creating shame for that,
Hmm.
right? I think that like it's a grief for her, but she understands that it's a good move for us.
I think over this past year, your mom, in ways, like, I don't know your whole relationship with your mom, but as I've known you and observed your relationship with your mom, I would say you weren't necessarily raised to be a very needy child because
Yeah.
they couldn't have that child. And you were the
Yeah.
oldest. And I similarly, I wasn't the oldest, but my parents couldn't have handled me being needy. But then as I became an adult, that was hard for them that I didn't need. I mean, maybe just me for my mom. I didn't need her. And I think some of that played out with you and your mom, that you didn't
Yeah.
need her. But I think this allowed her to see that you needed her, not in a way that took away from who you are or your power, but in a way that she could show up and be there and be supportive, just in a different way of not being needy, but having needs.
Yeah. I would agree with that too. I would definitely say that my relationship with my mother has shifted probably over the last 2 or 3 years. There have been some personal things that have contributed, but I do think that there's been a lot of growth there. And I think even going back to that resistance, right? The resistance for me has been some self-doubt. I've had some self-doubt. I've had some like, what if I fail at this? What am I doing? It required a leap of faith for my partner and really my kid. I mean, my spouse has his job. That was part of the financial thing that we were figuring out. But also like I do have to succeed at this. This is a big leap for him and for us. And I think there was a level of the resistance was when I got down to it was is the right time and how is this going to affect my family, which I think is a valid thing, right? That we all agreed and sat down and like this was a democracy decision. And the other resistant was all of that fear of staying small and not having support and what is my family going to think and what is his family going to think and like what happens if this makes something that's irreparable. I mean, I think even for me there was this level of I was comfortable at Healing Pass. I loved my job at Healing Pass, and I had told you this is my plan, this is my long term.
Mm.
Even letting go of that felt like a resistance to me of like I have to be if I want something to change, I am going to have to shift this. And that was hard. I think that that's
Hmm.
still been the hardest part. But all of those decisions it was checking in with okay, so what does it mean to give this up? What does it mean to let this go? And I think all of the toxic or like stay small resistance was from that shame core of no one's going to like me anymore, or I'm going to lose these relationships, or I'm going to, I don't know, piss my parents off and they're never going to talk to me again. I don't know.
Hmm.
There
Or
were there
just
were a few.
fail,
Yeah,
fail.
just fail. What happens
Yeah.
if I fail? I'm not good at that. I'm not good at failure. And so I think that all of those
Mm.
were there, but I think that it was smaller. I was able to recognize that that was coming from a shame or a fear-based space rather than these are the questions that I need to ask, right? I think that
Hmm.
there's practical questions that need to be asked in that kind of resistance, but then there's the shame that will keep you stuck. You can talk
Hmm.
yourself out of anything.
Right, right. Well, and I think again, sometimes we see questions that we would ask our clients in moments of their growth. We end up being like, oh, right. Yeah, I got to ask myself that. What would it mean to fail? Do I just pivot? Is failing actually just the opportunity to pivot? And maybe I was headed in the wrong direction and the pivot was necessary. But I could call it a failure and then go back to being small, or I could pivot and explore what that is about.
Right. I think in so many ways, like failure, if we allow it to, gets us out of the box that we're thinking in. I also think that sometimes it helps us recalibrate what's important and what
Hmm.
that looks like.
Yeah,
So,
because I think when doubt or that fear or shame is really showing up, it's hard to have some discernment and trust yourself, trust the people you lean on during those times, because those are pretty hard things to get past, right? But when we start to gain some distance from those fears or doubts or the shame, that's where I think we have some discernment and we can get some clarity. It's not like an instruction manual, but we get some clarity. I think it's a process of how do I stay curious without pressuring myself to know right now or to
mhm,
decide right now. And sometimes I know for me, I notice when I'm curious, there might be moments when of panic or like, what am I doing? Or what if this happens, right? I also notice that overall, I'm not reacting from a place of panic or fear.
mhm.
And sometimes I'm like, why am I not doing that? That would be taking action, and I'm not. But I think that's where I'm being curious or I'm looking for discernment and like settling in a way to my body and just not sure where I'm going, but I'm going to keep doing this.
Yeah. I I think that there's something, okay, so I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I started skiing a few years ago. I had attempted snowboarding. I was really bad at it. I was pretty much at the point of giving up. And then I switched to skiing and fell in love. I love skiing. But early on, one of the things that I had to recognize is that panic, that like I need to do something because I'm panicking, because I'm going too fast, or because I catch an edge, or whatever it is, that will absolutely cause me to crash every time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just because you tense up, you start overthinking it versus letting your body do what it naturally needs to do to get out of the space. I had this at the end of the season last year. I took on a run that was harder than anything I had done to that point. And it was pretty steep. It was steeper than what I was used to. And at the top of the hill, I panicked, full panicked. It was bad. Ski came off. My spouse had to help me. Like he went and got the ski for me, put it back on. And he was like, "What are you doing? You know how to do this. This hill is no different than every hill we've gone down." Right? He talked me through it. And he was like, "You just have to trust yourself to get down the hill." Right? You don't have to trust the hill. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to trust the you don't have to trust the grade of the hill. You don't have to trust how steep it is. You just have to trust yourself. You know how to slow yourself down. You know how to make big turns to keep you functional. You don't have to go straight down the hill. You have to trust yourself to get you down the hill. And amazingly, it worked. I got down the hill just fine, right? No other wrecks. And I have thought about that. And I'm like, this is the difference, right? This is the difference between shame, panic, and no, I can trust myself, even if this is hard. I don't have to trust the terrain. I don't have to trust what is coming up, but I can trust that I have the skills to get through that. I do think that that's a difference, right?
Well,
Is
and
if you're,
and that would be some intention.
Mhm,
Just following your example, you had been skiing that season. You had loved it. You were embracing it. You were learning things. I can imagine getting to the top of that hard hill and being like, trust myself. Like, I've never done this before. But it
mhm,
is almost like a downshifting in our body where we have to anchor ourselves to our core and be like, I'm going to trust that I have what I need, even though I don't know.
mhm.
I'm going to trust that I have what I need. And that's That's a hard place to be. It's an important place to be. It's how we
Yeah,
build trust in ourselves.
right. And I think that there are areas in my life that I do that really well. And I think that there are areas in my life that I don't do that well at all. But I do think when we're talking about orientation, that is my goal,
Hmm.
to be able to trust that I have what I need to get through it. And even if it's messy and even if it's hard, I can trust me in the process. I can trust that I am going to show up as me in the process every time.
Right, right. That whether that's the mistakes that led to some wisdom and experience, whatever our growth has looked like, that's what we need. That's what shows up in those moments
Yeah.
that get us through the resistance, the doubt, the fear, the shame.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I don't know, like I think that at this part of my life, am starting to understand. I'm telling people I'm entering my crone era because I am starting to get gray hair, and something happens at 40 that like just magically things in your body stop working, or they start working in overdrive. Like you hit it and then all of a sudden. But I do think I am at a point in my life where I'm starting to recognize the journey is worth way more than the destination, right? Like
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
journey itself is is the point.
Right.
And if you get to the destination, great. If you get to a destination, great. But like the journey is the point.
Yeah. I think we can end there. I think that's enough to sit with.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on. It was great talking with you and talking about what the new year holds and
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
where things might take us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm excited. I still want to do this, right? I'm
Yeah, we still
planning on,
plan to have Rachel on as a regular.
yep.
Thanks. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.